Marcus Webb wiped the grease from his weathered hands with a torn cloth that had seen better days 20 years ago. The maintenance bay of Orbital Station Delta 7 hummed with the sound of alien machinery and the chatter of young technicians who spoke in languages that still sounded strange to his old Earth-trained ears. At 73 years old, Marcus moved slowly but with purpose as he worked on the ancient, Earth-built atmospheric processor that kept the station's human quarters breathable. The younger engineers walked past his workstation without a second glance. They carried sleek diagnostic tablets that glowed with holographic displays and wore tool belts filled with devices that could reshape matter at the molecular level. Marcus looked down at his own toolkit, metal wrenches, wire strippers, and a multimeter that had been manufactured on Earth before humanity had even made contact with alien life. The tools were older than some of the aliens working around him. Another relic maintaining relics, he heard one of the Zentoran technicians whisper to his colleague as they passed. Marcus pretended not to understand their language, though he had picked up enough alien tongues over the decades to follow most conversations. Let them think what they wanted. His atmospheric processor had been running without failure for 15 years while their advanced systems needed constant maintenance. The morning shift was nearly over when the emergency alarms began blaring throughout the station. Marcus looked up from his work as red warning lights bathed the maintenance bay in an ominous glow. The automated announcement system crackled to life in the standard galactic common tongue, followed by translations in a dozen other languages. All station personnel report to emergency stations. Priority Alpha distress signal received from Hegemony flagship Vorthan. Engine failure in Sector 7. Estimated crew complement 3,000. Rescue operations commencing immediately. Marcus felt his stomach tighten. He knew the Vorthan by reputation, the largest and most advanced ship in the Hegemony fleet. A symbol of cooperative engineering between a dozen different species. If something had gone wrong with that vessel, it was serious. The ship carried not just crew members but diplomats, scientists, and trade representatives from across the galaxy. The maintenance bay emptied quickly as technicians rushed to their emergency posts. Marcus continued working on his atmospheric processor, knowing that his services would not be requested. The Hegemony had engineers far more qualified than an old human mechanic. They had specialists in quantum field dynamics, bio-neural network integration, and exotic matter manipulation. What could a man who still used manual tools possibly offer? Hours passed before Marcus learned the true scope of the disaster. The Vorthan's experimental exotic matter drive had suffered a complete cascade failure. The ship was stranded in deep space with no propulsion and failing life support systems. Worse, the exotic matter containment field was destabilizing, threatening to tear the ship apart from the inside. 3 separate engineering teams had already shuttled to the Vorthan. The best minds from the Galactic Engineering Consortium were working around the clock to solve the problem. Reports filtered back to the station every few hours, each one more grim than the last. The ship's bio-neural networks were shutting down, one by one. The quantum harmonics were completely out of phase. The exotic matter core was generating dimensional distortions that defied all known physics. Marcus remembered another ship, another crisis, 25 years ago. The Catherian warship Nexus had been declared unsalvageable after a battle with space pirates. Its hybrid biomechanical systems had been damaged beyond repair according to every expert who examined it. The ship was worth a fortune in advanced technology, but no one could figure out how to fix the complex interaction between its living components and its mechanical systems. Marcus had been younger then, still in his 40s and working as a contractor for the Colonial Engineering Corps. He had spent 3 days studying the Nexus, not with advanced scanners or quantum analyzers, but by walking through the ship and listening to the sounds it made. He had traced power flow patterns with his hands, tasted the air for chemical traces that might indicate system failures, and watched how the biomechanical components moved in response to different stimuli. The solution had been embarrassingly simple. The ship's living components were stressed because they were being fed the wrong nutrients. The mechanical systems were trying to compensate by running harder, which created a feedback loop that made everything worse. Marcus had jury-rigged a basic filtration system, using components from a dozen different sources, and fed the biomechanical systems a mixture that resembled their natural diet. Within hours, the ship was operational again. The repair had made Marcus briefly famous throughout the hegemony. For a few years, he had been in high demand as a consultant on impossible engineering problems. But fame faded quickly in a galaxy full of new technologies and younger experts. The repair of the Nexus became a footnote in engineering history, a lucky guess by a primitive human who had stumbled onto the right solution through pure chance. Now, as Marcus listened to the reports from the Vorthen, he wondered if history might repeat itself. The descriptions of the ship's failures sounded familiar, not the specific technical details, but the pattern. Multiple systems failing in sequence, advanced diagnostics showing contradictory readings, expert teams unable to find a common solution. It was the same kind of chaos he had seen on the Nexus. The shift supervisor's voice echoed through the maintenance bay over the intercom system. All available personnel to the main conference room. Emergency briefing in 10 minutes. Marcus cleaned his tools and secured his workstation before making his way to the conference room. The space was packed with engineers, technicians, and administrative staff from across the station. Commander Thomases stood at the front of the room, his blue-scaled Zentoran features tense with worry. "The situation aboard the Vorthen continues to deteriorate," Thomases announced without preamble. "Life support is failing faster than anticipated. The exotic matter containment field shows signs of complete breakdown within 48 hours. If that happens, the resulting explosion will be visible from 3 star systems." A murmur ran through the assembled crowd. Marcus had seen exotic matter explosions before. They left nothing behind but twisted space and radiation that lasted for centuries. "3 engineering teams have declared the ship beyond salvage," Thomases continued. "The Hegemony Council is preparing to evacuate the crew, but our fastest rescue ships won't reach the Vorthen for 6 days. We need a miracle." Commander Thoss's eyes swept across the room, pausing briefly on Marcus before moving on. The old human engineer sat quietly in the back, invisible among the crowd of younger, more qualified personnel. But in his mind he was already on the Vorthen, listening to the sounds of a dying ship and wondering what simple solution everyone else had missed. The transport shuttle's engines hummed with a deep vibration that Marcus felt in his bones as they approached the massive bulk of the Vorthen. Through the small viewport, he could see the ship's hull flickering with strange energy patterns that made his eyes water if he looked too long. The exotic matter containment failure was creating visual distortions that bent light in impossible ways. Commander Thomases had surprised everyone by requesting Marcus's assistance after the 4th Engineering Team reported complete failure. The decision had caused heated arguments among the station's senior staff. The time was running out and desperate situations called for desperate measures. Marcus sat alone in the back of the shuttle while 3 Zentoran technicians whispered among themselves about the foolishness of sending an ancient human to solve problems that had defeated the galaxy's best minds. The Vorthen's docking bay was a cathedral of alien engineering. The ceiling stretched up for hundreds of meters, supported by graceful arches that seemed to grow from the deck like organic structures. Bioluminescent panels provided soft lighting that shifted colors in response to the ship's changing conditions. Everything was beautiful, elegant, and completely foreign to Marcus's Earth-trained sensibilities. Captain Race met them at the airlock, her tall Altarian frame tense with exhaustion and worry. Her normally pristine uniform was stained with coolant fluid, and her forearms moved in nervous patterns as she spoke. "Engineer Webb, I must tell you that I have little hope for success. We have exhausted every possible solution. The ship is dying, and we may have to begin emergency evacuation procedures within the next 12 hours. Marcus nodded politely and shouldered his tool bag. The weight of it felt reassuring against his back, metal tools that worked the same way, regardless of what kind of ship they were on. "I'd like to see the engine room first, if that's possible." Corvin, the ship's Trilaxian chief engineer, led them through corridors that pulsed with bioluminescent veins carrying information throughout the ship's nervous system. The walls themselves were alive, growing, and adapting in real time to changing conditions. It was the most advanced biomechanical integration Marcus had ever seen, far beyond anything that had existed when he repaired the Nexus decades ago. The cascade failure began 36 hours ago, Corvin explained as they walked. His crab-like legs clicked against the living deck plating with each step. The exotic matter core destabilized during a routine efficiency optimization. Since then, we have lost 17 major systems and 43 subsystems. Our best projections show complete life support failure within 18 hours. The engine room was a sphere nearly a kilometer in diameter, its curved walls covered with crystalline interfaces that sparkled like diamonds. At the center, contained within multiple layers of energy fields, the exotic matter core writhed like a captured storm. It was beautiful and terrifying at the same time, pure energy torn from the space between dimensions and forced to power a machine, built by creatures who barely understood what they were harnessing. Holographic displays surrounded the core, showing cascading failures in languages and mathematical systems from a dozen different worlds. Marcus recognized some of the symbols from his work on other alien ships, but most of it was beyond his understanding. The assembled engineering teams worked frantically at control stations, their faces grim with the knowledge that they were fighting a losing battle. The quantum harmonics are completely out of phase, explained Dr. Yanol, a cetacean specialist in exotic matter physics. Her translation device converted her sonar-based language into something Marcus could understand. The bio-neural networks are rejecting all input commands. The dimensional anchor points are shifting outside acceptable parameters. We believe the core is trying to return to its natural state in transdimensional space. Marcus walked slowly around the engine room while the experts continued their explanations. He ignored the holographic displays and the urgent chatter of the engineering teams. Instead, he listened to the ship itself. Every machine made sounds that told a story to those who knew how to hear it. The Vorthan was singing a song of distress, but it was a complex harmony that wove together the voices of a dozen different engineering philosophies. The Trilaxian biomechanical systems hummed, with organic rhythms that rose and fell like breathing. The Zentaran quantum processors chimed with crystalline precision, each note perfectly calculated and timed. The Altarian neural networks whispered with electronic voices that spoke in rapid bursts of data. Each system was working exactly as it was designed to work, but they were not working together. Has anyone tried listening to the ship? Marcus asked during a brief pause in the technical briefings. The assembled engineers looked at him with confusion. Our acoustic monitoring systems are operating within normal parameters, replied one of the hegemony specialists. All audio signatures have been analyzed and cataloged. Marcus shook his head. No, I mean really listening. Not with instruments, but with your ears. Each system on this ship is designed differently because each species approaches engineering differently. But they're all trying to work together in the same space. What if the problem isn't that the systems are broken, but that they're trying to communicate with each other in ways they weren't designed for? Corvin's compound eyes focused on Marcus with new interest. You think this is a translation problem? Maybe. On Earth, we have an old saying about too many cooks spoiling the soup. When you put together systems that were never meant to work together, sometimes they interfere with each other in ways that nobody expects. Marcus spent the next several hours walking through different sections of the ship, always listening. He placed his hands on conduits and felt the vibrations of power flowing through them. He watched how the biomechanical components responded to stimuli from the electronic systems. He tasted the air in different compartments, noting subtle chemical changes that might indicate stress in the living components. The ship was indeed trying to communicate with itself, but it was like a Tower of Babel where every component spoke a different language. The Trilaxian biosystems communicated through chemical signals and electrical impulses that mimicked organic neural networks. The Zentoran quantum processors used frequency harmonics and crystalline resonance patterns. The Altarian neural networks relied on rapid data bursts and logical tree structures. Each system was sending signals that made perfect sense within its own context. But those signals were being misinterpreted by the other systems. The biomechanical components thought the quantum processors were sending distress signals, so they were flooding the ship with stress hormones. The quantum processors thought the neural networks were requesting more power, so they were overloading the energy distribution grid. The neural networks thought the biosystems were malfunctioning, so they were trying to shut down connections to protect themselves. It was a classic cascading failure, but not caused by any single malfunction. The ship's different systems were essentially having an argument with each other, and the exotic matter core was caught in the middle, receiving contradictory commands from multiple sources. "I think I know what's wrong," Marcus told the assembled engineering teams after his inspection was complete. "But you're not going to like my solution." Captain Race leaned forward with hope and desperation in her large eyes. "At this point, Engineer Webb, I am willing to consider any option." Marcus looked around the room at the faces of beings from across the galaxy, all of them far more educated and technologically advanced than he was. "I need to rewire your ship." "Not the advanced systems. Those are working fine. I need to add something that was never part of the original design. A translation layer that lets all these different systems talk to each other without causing confusion." "What kind of translation layer?" asked Dr. Y. Marcus smiled and patted his tool bag. "The oldest kind there is. Simple mechanical switches and basic electrical circuits. I'm going to teach your ship to speak human." Marcus began his work in the quietest section of the ship he could find, a maintenance corridor deep in the Vorthan's belly where the background hum of alien technology was muted by layers of hull plating. He opened his tool bag and laid out instruments that looked primitive compared to the ship's gleaming biomechanical interfaces: wire strippers, electrical tape, copper conducting cables, and mechanical relays that clicked and sparked when activated. The ship's engineering teams watched with growing horror as Marcus began cutting into the elegant, crystalline conduits that carried power throughout the vessel. Each conduit was a work of art, grown rather than manufactured, with internal structures that channeled energy and patterns too complex for human mathematics to fully describe. To alien eyes, what Marcus was doing looked like vandalism of the highest order. "Stop this immediately," demanded Dr. Yanel, her sonar-based language crackling with outrage through the translation device. "You are destroying irreplaceable biotechnical components. These conduits took months to grow and cannot be replaced without returning to a Trilaxian shipyard." Marcus looked up from his work, a length of copper wire in one hand and a mechanical relay in the other. "I'm not destroying anything. I'm adding bypass circuits that will let your different systems talk to each other without interference. Think of it like adding a mediator to a conversation between people who speak different languages." Corvin scuttled closer, his compound eyes examining the crude electrical connections Marcus had spliced into the ship's sophisticated neural pathways. "But these are purely mechanical systems. They have no intelligence, no adaptive capabilities. How can simple switches and basic circuits interface with quantum consciousness matrices and bioneural networks?" "Because they don't try to be intelligent," Marcus replied, stripping insulation from another piece of wire. "Intelligence is what's causing your problems in the first place. Every system on this ship is so smart that it tries to interpret and respond to every signal it receives. But sometimes you don't want interpretation, you just want simple, reliable communication." As Marcus worked, he explained his theory to the gathered aliens. Each species had developed engineering solutions based on their own biology and psychology. The Trilaxians, with their collective consciousness, built systems that shared information fluidly and adapted to changing conditions like living organisms. The Xenorans, with their mathematical minds, created quantum processors that calculated perfect solutions to every problem. The Altarians, with their four-armed dexterity and rapid thought processes, designed neural networks that could process multiple data streams simultaneously. All of these approaches work perfectly when they're isolated, Marcus said, connecting a mechanical relay to a bioneural interface with careful precision. But when you put them together, they start trying to help each other in ways that actually make things worse. It's like having three people trying to steer the same vehicle at the same time. The mechanical relays Marcus was installing were deliberately simple. They had only two states, on or off, and they responded to electrical signals in exactly the same way every time. When a bioneural network sent a complex chemical signal requesting system status, Marcus's relay translated into a simple electrical pulse that the quantum processors could understand. When the quantum processors responded with a mathematically perfect frequency pattern, another relay converted it into the binary data stream that the Altarian neural networks expected. Captain Race arrived in the maintenance corridor just as Marcus was installing his 5/10th relay junction. Her forearms gestured in patterns that Marcus had learned meant extreme agitation in Altarian body language. Engineer Webb, I have reports that you are installing primitive electrical systems throughout my ship. My staff is telling me that these modifications could cause catastrophic system failures. Marcus wiped sweat from his forehead and gestured to a small display screen he had connected to his makeshift monitoring system. Actually, they're already working. Look at this readout. The bioneural stress indicators in Section 7 have dropped by 30% since I installed the translation circuits. Your Trilaxian systems are finally getting clear information about what the other systems need. The display showed data in simple graphs and charts that any engineer could understand, regardless of their species or technological background. System stress levels, power flow patterns, and communication errors were all trending in positive directions wherever Marcus had installed his primitive relay networks, but the work was exhausting and time-consuming. Each junction had to be carefully calibrated to match the specific characteristics of the alien systems it was connecting. Marcus worked for 18 hours straight, sustained by cups of bitter coffee that tasted like home and sandwiches that one of the human crew members had smuggled from the ship's food stores. The other engineering teams continued their own work, trying to solve the exotic matter containment crisis through advanced theoretical approaches. They calculated quantum field equations, adjusted bioneural pathway configurations, and attempted to reharmonize the dimensional anchor points that kept the exotic matter stable in normal space. Their efforts were technically brilliant, but increasingly desperate as the ship's condition continued to deteriorate. This is insane, muttered one of the hegemony specialists as he watched Marcus solder copper wires to a crystalline bio-interface. We're trying to save the most advanced ship in the galaxy with technology that was obsolete before humans even left their home planet. Marcus looked up from his work with a tired smile. Sometimes the simplest solution is the best solution. Your advanced systems are fighting each other because they're too smart for their own good. These mechanical relays don't try to be smart, they just do exactly what they're told. Every time, without interpretation or adaptation. By the 20th hour of continuous work, Marcus had installed over 100 relay junctions throughout the ship's critical systems. His hands were cramped from working with small components, his back ached from crawling through maintenance tunnels, and his eyes burned from staring at tiny connections in poor lighting. But the results were undeniable. The ship's bioneural networks had stopped flooding the corridors with stress hormones. The quantum processors had ceased their frantic attempts to recalculate solutions to problems that no longer existed. The Altarian neural networks had slowed their data processing to normal speeds instead of the panic-driven overclocking that had been consuming massive amounts of power. It's actually working, Corvin admitted grudgingly as he examined the latest system reports. The cascade failure has stopped spreading to new systems. We've regained control of secondary life support and restored partial power to the navigation array. But the exotic matter core remained unstable, its chaotic energy patterns still threatening to tear the ship apart. All of Marcus's relay junctions had accomplished was to stop the situation from getting worse. They hadn't actually solved the core problem that had started the crisis in the first place. Marcus stood in the engine room, staring up at the writhing mass of exotic matter contained within its energy fields. His crude mechanical systems had restored communication between the ship's various components, but the core itself remained a mystery. It existed partially outside normal space-time, governed by physics that no human truly understood. "We've bought ourselves some time," he told the assembled engineering teams. "But we still need to figure out how to stabilize the core before it breaks free of containment. And I think the solution is going to be just as simple as everything else I've done." Here, Captain Race approached him with cautious hope in her large eyes. "What do you need from us, Engineer Webb?" Marcus smiled and picked up his oldest tool, a simple electrical multimeter that had been manufactured on Earth before humanity had learned that exotic matter even existed. "I need to listen to what the core is trying to tell us. And I have a feeling it's been trying to say the same thing all along, it just needs someone who speaks its language." Marcus stood before the exotic matter core with his ancient multimeter in hand, watching the chaotic energy patterns that had defied the galaxy's best scientific minds for over 2 days. The containment field flickered with dangerous instability, and everyone in the engine room could feel the subtle vibrations as reality itself bent under the strain of containing forces that belonged in the space between dimensions. The other engineers had tried everything in their considerable arsenal of knowledge. They had attempted to reharmonize the quantum frequencies using crystalline resonance chambers. They had fed the bioneural networks with carefully calculated nutrient solutions designed to optimize their performance. They had recalibrated the dimensional anchor points using mathematical formulas that existed in 17 different dimensions simultaneously, but Marcus ignored all the advanced instruments and sophisticated theories. Instead, he connected his simple multimeter to one of the basic electrical circuits that powered the containment field generators. The device was so primitive that it couldn't even display readings in the same units that the alien equipment used, but it could measure the fundamental electrical current that flowed through the ship's power grid. "What are you hoping to accomplish with that antique?" asked Dr. Yanel, her sonar-based language translator crackling with barely contained frustration. "Our quantum sensors can detect fluctuations in the 50th decimal place. Your instrument cannot even measure exotic matter interactions." Marcus watched the needle on his multimeter bounce erratically as current flowed through the circuits. "I'm not trying to measure exotic matter. I'm trying to measure what the exotic matter is doing to everything else on the ship. Sometimes you can learn more about a problem by looking at its effects rather than trying to understand its causes." The pattern of electrical fluctuations was chaotic but not random. Marcus had spent enough years working with machinery to recognize the difference between true malfunction and systematic behavior that was simply too complex to understand immediately. The exotic matter core wasn't malfunctioning. It was responding to something, reacting to inputs that the ships advanced sensors weren't designed to detect. "Corvin, can you show me the original design specifications for the core containment system?" Marcus asked without taking his eyes off the multimeter readings. The Trilaxian chief engineer activated a holographic display that showed the exotic matter drive in 3-dimensional detail. The design was a masterpiece of cooperative engineering, with components contributed by 7 different species and integrated using the most advanced theoretical physics available. Each species had contributed their greatest expertise to create something that no single world could have built alone. Marcus studied the display while continuing to monitor the electrical patterns. "This is beautiful work, but I think I see the problem. Each species designed their part of the system to work perfectly with their own technology, but nobody considered how all the parts would interact with each other at the most basic level." He pointed to a section of the holographic display that showed the power distribution network. The Trilaxian bioneural systems use organic electrical impulses that fluctuate naturally like a heartbeat. The Zentauran quantum processors use perfectly regular energy cycles that never vary by even a microsecond. The Altarian neural networks use burst patterns that spike and fade according to processing demand. All 3 types of power flow are trying to feed the same exotic matter core simultaneously. Dr. Yanel's compound eyes widened with understanding. The core is receiving contradictory energy signatures. It cannot determine which pattern represents the correct operational parameters. Exactly, Marcus said, his multimeter showing increasingly erratic readings as the core's instability worsened. The exotic matter exists partially outside our dimension, so it doesn't follow the same rules as normal physics. But it still needs consistent input signals to maintain stable containment. Right now it's getting 3 different sets of instructions at the same time. Captain Race moved closer, all 4 of her arms gesturing urgently. Can your mechanical relays solve this problem the same way they resolved the communication issues? Marcus nodded slowly, his mind already working through the engineering challenge. I think so, but it's going to require connecting my relay system directly to the exotic matter containment field. If I make a mistake, the resulting explosion will vaporize everything within 1,000 kilometers. The engineering teams fell, silent as the implications sank in. The Vorthen carried 3,000 crew members who were depending on them to find a solution. Beyond that, the ship's destruction would eliminate some of the galaxy's finest minds and most important diplomatic personnel. The political and scientific consequences would ripple through dozens of worlds, but time was running out. The containment field was showing increasing signs of failure, and the ship's hull was beginning to buckle under dimensional stress. Marcus could feel the vibrations getting stronger with each passing minute, like standing next to a giant tuning fork that was slowly tearing itself apart. I need everyone except essential personnel to evacuate this section of the ship, Marcus announced as he began connecting his primitive relays to the exotic matter containment system. If this goes wrong, I don't want anyone else caught in the blast radius. Most of the engineering teams left reluctantly, but Corvin and Captain Race remained behind along with a skeleton crew of technicians who refused to abandon their posts. Marcus appreciated their courage, even though he knew there was nothing they could do to help if his plan failed. The work was delicate and dangerous. Marcus had to splice his mechanical relays into systems that operated on principles beyond human understanding, while exotic matter writhed just meters away from his position. One wrong connection could destabilize the containment field instantly, but hesitation would lead to the same result. As the field continued to deteriorate, each relay had to be calibrated to translate between different types of electrical signals, while maintaining the precise timing that exotic matter containment required. Marcus connected bioneural impulses to quantum frequency generators through simple, mechanical switches that bridged the gap between organic and crystalline technologies. He routed Altarian data bursts through copper wires that converted digital spikes into steady analog current that the exotic matter could recognize as consistent input. Field stability improving by 2%. Reported one of the remaining technicians as Marcus completed the 10th relay connection. Core energy patterns showing signs of harmonization. Marcus wiped sweat from his forehead and continued working. His hands were steady despite the danger, guided by decades of experience with machinery that had taught him to trust his instincts even when logic suggested caution. Each connection brought the exotic matter core closer to stability, but the work had to be perfect. There would be no opportunity to correct mistakes. 15% improvement in field cohesion, called out another technician. Dimensional stress readings dropping toward acceptable levels. The exotic matter core began to respond to the unified signal input that Marcus's relays provided. Instead of receiving contradictory instructions from 3 different technological paradigms, it now received a single, consistent command stream that had been translated into terms it could understand. The chaotic energy patterns started to settle into regular oscillations that matched the ship's power grid frequency. 25% stability increase. Core harmonics approaching nominal parameters. Marcus made the final connection and stepped back from the containment system. His primitive relays were now fully integrated with the most advanced technology in the galaxy, creating a bridge between human engineering philosophy and exotic matter. Physics that existed partially outside normal spacetime, the exotic matter core pulsed once with brilliant light that made everyone in the engine room shield their eyes. When the glow faded, the chaotic energy patterns had been replaced by steady, rhythmic oscillations that matched the ship's power requirements perfectly. The containment field solidified into stable configuration that showed no signs of further deterioration. "Full stability achieved," announced the senior technician with amazement in his voice. "All systems operating within normal parameters. The core is responding properly to control inputs for the first time since the crisis began." Marcus looked up at the now stable exotic matter core and smiled. Sometimes the simplest solution really is the best solution. The core wasn't broken, it was just confused. Now it knows exactly what we want it to do. The news of the Vorthan's salvation spread through the hegemony communication networks faster than light itself. Within hours of the exotic matter core stabilization, every major world had received detailed reports of how an elderly human engineer had accomplished what the galaxy's finest minds had declared impossible. The story captured imaginations across dozens of species, each marveling at the audacity of solving advanced theoretical problems with primitive mechanical solutions. Marcus found himself once again thrust into the spotlight he had briefly occupied 25 years earlier. Representatives from engineering academies, research institutions, and manufacturing corporations flooded the Vorthan with requests for interviews and consultations. The simple mechanical relays he had installed throughout the ship became objects of intense study as scientists tried to understand how such basic technology could interface so effectively with exotic matter physics. "The beauty of your solution is not its complexity, but its universality," explained Dr. Senna, a prominent hegemony physicist who had traveled from the capital world specifically to study Marcus's work. "These mechanical interfaces can translate between any technological paradigms, regardless of their origin or sophistication level. You have created a universal language for machines." Captain Race hosted a formal ceremony in the Vorthan's main assembly hall to honor Marcus's achievement. Representatives from every species in the hegemony attended, either in person or through holographic projection. The hall was filled with beings whose ancestors had developed faster-than-light travel, artificial intelligence, and exotic matter manipulation, all gathered to pay tribute to an old human who carried antique tools in a worn leather bag. Engineer Webb has reminded us of a fundamental truth that we had forgotten in our pursuit of ever greater technological sophistication, Captain Race announced to the assembled crowd. Sometimes the most advanced solution is also the simplest. 1. His work has not only saved this ship and its crew, but has opened new possibilities for cooperative engineering that we had never considered. The Hegemony Engineering Council formally established the Webb Protocol 3 weeks later, mandating that all future multi-species projects include basic, mechanical interface systems to ensure compatibility between different technological approaches. Engineering schools across the galaxy began teaching courses in primitive integration techniques that focused on finding simple solutions to complex problems rather than adding layers of sophistication. Marcus returned to Orbital Station Delta 7 as a hero, but he insisted on keeping his old maintenance bay workspace rather than accepting the luxurious laboratory that Commander Thomas's offered him. The atmospheric processor that had been his primary responsibility still needed regular maintenance, and Marcus found comfort in working with familiar machinery that responded to his touch in predictable ways, but his workshop was no longer a forgotten corner of the station. Young engineers from across the hegemony requested assignments to Delta 7 specifically to study under Marcus's guidance. They came expecting to learn advanced theoretical principles and instead found themselves learning to listen to machinery, to feel vibrations through their hands, and to trust their instincts even when sophisticated instruments suggested different approaches. "Why do you still use these old tools when you could have access to the most advanced equipment in the galaxy?" asked Tevel, a young Zentoran engineer who had been studying under Marcus for 2 months. Her crystalline thought processes struggled to understand the appeal of mechanical instruments that provided less precise measurements than quantum sensors. Marcus smiled as he adjusted a valve on the atmospheric processor using a wrench that was older than interstellar travel. Because these tools work the same way every time, regardless of what kind of machine I'm working on. When you use equipment that's smarter than you are, you start depending on it to think for you. But machines don't think, they just do exactly what they're designed to do. If you want to understand them, you have to think like they do. The workshop became a pilgrimage site for engineers who had heard stories of the web protocol but wanted to understand the philosophy behind it. Marcus welcomed visitors from every species, sharing his knowledge freely while learning about their own engineering traditions. He discovered that every intelligent race had developed their own version of his mechanical interface concept at some point in their history, but had abandoned it in favor of more sophisticated approaches as their technology advanced. We call it the engineer's paradox, explained Vorth, an elderly Cytherian who had worked on the original Nexus repair team 25 years earlier. The more advanced our tools become, the further we drift from understanding the fundamental principles that make them work. Your web protocol forces us to remember those principles by making them visible again. 6 months after the Vorthan incident, Marcus received a priority communication from a distant system on the edge of hegemony space. A mining operation had discovered an ancient artifact that appeared to be a spacecraft from an unknown civilization, but its technology was so alien that no one could determine how to safely approach it without triggering what appeared to be powerful defensive systems. The artifact shows signs of multiple technological paradigms that are completely unfamiliar to our databases, the message explained. Energy signatures suggest exotic matter manipulation beyond our current understanding, but integrated with mechanical systems that appear almost primitive by comparison. We believe you may be the only engineer in the galaxy with the expertise to safely investigate this discovery. Marcus looked at the technical data that accompanied the message and recognized the same pattern he had seen on the Vorthan. Multiple incompatible systems trying to work together without a common interface layer. The unknown civilization had apparently faced the same engineering challenges that plagued multi-species cooperation, but had solved them in ways that no current hegemony technology could duplicate. Pack your tools, he told his current group of students as he prepared for another impossible assignment. We're going to meet some engineers who might have been even crazier than I am. The transport that carried Marcus to the artifact discovery site was equipped with the most advanced analytical equipment available, but he spent the journey studying printouts of basic electrical diagrams and mechanical schematics. His students watched with growing understanding as he prepared for the mission using the same simple principles that had guided every successful repair he had ever completed. Remember, Marcus told them as their ship approached the mysterious artifact, no matter how advanced or alien technology appears, it still has to follow the same basic rules that govern all machines. If something was built by intelligent beings, then other intelligent beings can figure out how it works. You just have to listen carefully enough to hear what it's trying to tell you. The artifact waited in space like a puzzle box left behind by a civilization that had vanished long before humans had learned to make fire. Its hull showed signs of damage from countless centuries of exposure to cosmic radiation, but its mysterious system still hummed with power that defied analysis. Marcus smiled as he prepared his tools for another impossible challenge, knowing that somewhere in its alien complexity was a simple solution waiting to be discovered. The old human engineer had proven once again that experience and intuition could triumph over any obstacle, and his legacy would continue to inspire problem solvers across the galaxy for generations to come. In a universe full of sophisticated technology and advanced theoretical knowledge, sometimes the most valuable skill was knowing when to ignore complexity and trust in the simple truths that made all machines possible.